A man openly says he doesn't want to live around black people. And instead of being cancelled, he's rewarded with followers, sponsors, and headlines. 10 years ago, a statement like that would have ended someone's career overnight. But today, it's content. It's monetized. It's trending. We're watching a cultural shift unfold in real time, where outrage sells, algorithms reward division, and even hate can be branded as honesty. This isn't just about one man. It's about what his rise says about us, and how the power of influence online is changing faster than ever before. The first time I came across Nick Fuentes was back in 2021 on the Just Pearly Things YouTube channel. At the time, he struck me as just another guy speaking whatever came to mind, with little filter. Later, I saw him on Fresh and Fed, still awkward, still saying things as they occurred to him, often tinged with subtle racism. Honestly, it wasn't all that surprising. This is often how figures on the far right present themselves, whether in politics, sales, or online spaces. Initially, I didn't give him much thought. With the Biden administration in place, I assumed he wouldn't gain any real traction. And, for a while, I was right. That changed when Elon Musk acquired X. Platforms like Rumble also played a role, amplifying sentiments that many white Americans had felt but hadn't been able to express freely on mainstream social media. In the early 2000s or 2010s, anyone voicing controversial or racially charged opinions could expect to be immediately deplatformed. But Nick Fuentes managed to bypass that entirely. I don't want to live around black people. I just don't. If I had a wife and kids, it would be irresponsible for me to do so, he says. He clarifies that he isn't claiming every black person is violent or the same, yet he points to what he sees in the news, in newspapers, and in everyday city life. Driving through downtown Chicago, for example, he believes he knows who he needs to watch out for, the people he fears might carjack him, shoot a stray bullet, or even confront him directly with a weapon. He describes scenarios like someone pulling up beside him, forcing a rifle in his face, and taking his phone or worse. This is Nick Fuentes speaking openly about not wanting to live near black communities, an opinion that, even 5 to 10 years ago, would have been largely unspoken in mainstream spaces. What's striking is not just the sentiment itself, but how it's now being received. Instead of widespread condemnation, he's receiving attention, engagement, and even praise from certain audiences who see his statements as honest or refreshingly blunt. That framing, calling overt racism honesty, is part of a larger cultural shift that's been taking shape quietly for years, but is now out in the open. Similar sentiments are echoed by movements like Return to the Land, RTTL, which have gained traction in states such as Missouri and Arkansas. RTTL presents itself as a community-building project encouraging white families to buy land and create isolated rural enclaves. On the surface, these initiatives are often branded as homesteading or family-first movements. But beneath the branding lies a familiar ideology, racial separation dressed up as self-sufficiency. The financial support behind these projects is growing, with crowdfunding campaigns, private investments, and social media networks promoting them as alternatives to diverse, chaotic urban environments. According to Fuentes, hostility from some white communities toward black people is intensifying, and it's becoming more visible, less restrained, and more socially acceptable in certain circles. What used to be whispered in private chat rooms or buried in online forums is now broadcast in podcasts, live streams, and political rallies. This normalization of racial resentment doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It's being reinforced by algorithms that reward outrage, media ecosystems that profit from division, and economic anxieties that are easily weaponized. But after this, Fuentes notes something else, something subtler and, in some ways, more revealing. He points out that while open hostility is growing, another shift is unfolding beneath the surface, a restructuring of communities themselves. The rise of ideological migration, where people move to live among others who share their political or cultural beliefs, is creating more homogeneous spaces, socially, racially, and economically. That's not limited to white nationalist groups, it's a broader trend across the political spectrum. But in the context of white separatist rhetoric, it becomes a tool for normalizing division as a practical, even rational, choice. This evolution, from silence to open advocacy, shows how racial discourse in America is being reframed. Public expressions of bias no longer automatically lead to social or professional exile for everyone. Instead, some figures are rewarded with larger platforms and loyal audiences who interpret backlash as proof of their authenticity. This creates a self-sustaining feedback loop. The more inflammatory the message, the stronger the loyalty of followers who view themselves as persecuted truth-tellers. What's most concerning is how these attitudes seep into policy, real estate trends, and digital communities. As private online groups form to discuss safe neighborhoods and cultural preservation, the language often mirrors segregationist logic, just updated with modern vocabulary. So, while the surface issue may seem like isolated racist commentary from fringe figures, it points to something deeper, a shifting social landscape where hostility, once taboo, is being rationalized as cultural preference or personal freedom. And that's the real story behind this moment, not just what's being said, but how the world around it is adjusting to make space for it. It seems like Nick Fuentes wants to emulate someone like Charlie, but he can't quite pull it together. He doesn't seem interested in doing what's right, and while his claims might not always seem extreme, there's no denying that he's racist. He may not openly label himself that way, but his words, like expressing fear of black people, carry clear racial prejudice. Critics point out the inconsistencies in his reasoning. If he fears black people based on certain stereotypes, what about those who don't fit those images? He also talks about wanting to marry someone who looks like him, admitting he might find a black woman attractive, but dismissing the possibility of being with her simply because she isn't white. Even black conservatives have called Fuentes out as racist, which is notable given that many of these same commentators often criticize black communities for perceived dysfunction or side with white officers in high-profile police cases. So when figures like Brandon Tatum, who has a white wife, feel compelled to label someone in the white conservative sphere as racist, it underscores just how extreme Fuentes' views appear. And this is precisely where Nick Fuentes' influence comes into play, making his presence and ideas particularly impactful. "We were pushed to this point. The Jewish community forced our hand," he declares, echoing Charlie Kirk's sentiment, "You have left us no choice." According to Fuentes, this is the experience shared by himself, Tucker Carlson, and Candace Owens, for opposing genocide, advocating America First, and calling for stricter border policies. In his view, those opposing him are hateful, intolerant, and obsessed with Israel, leaving conservatives with no room for compromise. Fuentes' commentary on Israel, while extreme, is only one example of his broader presence online. He has been banned from nearly every major platform for some time, although he returned to X, formerly Twitter. TikTok, for instance, won't even allow his name to appear. Attempts to search for him return a warning. The phrase may be linked to hateful behavior, and TikTok cites its commitment to community safety and preventing the spread of hate. Despite these restrictions, Fuentes has grown into a larger-than-life figure. He even appeared on the cover of the New York Times in an article titled "Nick Fuentes, a white nationalist problem for the right." Unfettered by social media limits, he continues to speak openly, unfiltered, and provocatively, reinforcing his influence in conservative and far-right circles. Nick Fuentes doesn't hold back, even when it comes to criticizing MAGA and former President Trump, a move almost unheard of on the right, given Trump's massive following. Yet, Fuentes has managed to grow his own audience despite, or perhaps because of, his willingness to attack such a prominent figure. He's also expanding his reach into new platforms. Fuentes is now on Spotify, able to monetize his podcast after previously being banned. His merchandising is thriving too, with items like his controversial shirt promoting his brand, sold through Fuentes.store. He's earning substantial income through Rumble, including payments in Bitcoin, all while reinforcing that he's not someone to be underestimated. While I disagree with nearly everything he stands for, his rise highlights an important lesson. If you create a community around your beliefs, people will come together to support it. A parallel can be seen in other spaces. For instance, Bose Watkins and the All-Black National Convention. I may not agree with him, but there's no denying the event's impact. It draws people, runs professionally, and fosters engagement, as my friend experienced firsthand in Houston. Similarly, grassroots efforts like comedian Corey Huck's show demonstrate that building from the ground up can create lasting influence. In today's digital world, anyone with a dedicated following can build influence and raise significant funds if they truly commit to it. Take, for instance, comedian Corey Holcomb. He tours successfully across the country, building from the ground up. Or Tariq Nasheed, who raised over $2 million for his Hidden History Museum. Even figures like Dr. Umar Johnson, despite frequent criticism, have proven they can attract strong financial support whenever they decide to rally their audiences. The point is clear: when people genuinely believe in your message, the momentum becomes undeniable. And that's what's happening with Nick Fuentes. As much as I disagree with his ideas, he's become too big to ignore. It comes down to resilience, consistency, and a refusal to care about backlash, traits that draw people in and slowly bend the rules in his favor. We've seen something similar with Candace Owens. Speaking out against major conservative institutions like the Daily Wire, and by extension, certain powerful interests, was once considered career suicide. Yet, she followed a path not unlike Fuentes. Ironically, many of the controversial statements Fuentes made first are now being echoed by Owens, though she faced far fewer consequences. Now, Fuentes, once penalized for his inflammatory views, is reaping rewards for the very same rhetoric. His rise shows how influence grows when enough people rally behind a cause. At a certain point, not even powerful institutions, or nations like Israel, can suppress it. Once a movement gains mass support, it becomes virtually unstoppable. We've seen the power of community in action across Black culture. Take Black Wall Street or the underground hip-hop scene. These movements created spaces and markets that couldn't be ignored. Even in London, hip-hop flourished despite initial resistance. Eventually, the city became a hub, attracting audiences and forcing recognition from the wider music industry. The same pattern emerges in Nigeria with Afrobeat and Nollywood. Whether or not you personally enjoy the music or films, the market and cultural influence are undeniable. Artists like Burna Boy and Davido command attention globally. The same principle applies in other creative spaces. For example, South African house and piano music, genres I personally love, have grown too big to ignore, shaping both local and international tastes. The lesson for Black communities is clear. By collaborating, investing in your own projects, and building your platforms, you can create movements and markets that operate on your terms. When your influence grows strong enough, it forces recognition, giving you leverage over how your work is received and monetized. We're already seeing this dynamic with platforms like X and Rumble. Creators who were once banned or marginalized are now generating so much revenue and attention that even YouTube, which previously excluded them, is reconsidering its stance, demonstrating the power of persistence, audience building, and strategic leverage. Listen, there's no way these banned creators can be kept off platforms forever, he observes. Creators are now earning more on platforms like Kick, Twitch, and Rumble than they might on YouTube. Alternatives like X and Facebook give them options, meaning YouTube is no longer the only path to success. Recognizing they are losing market share, YouTube is beginning to unban previously restricted figures, including Nick Fuentes and Sneo, because these creators have cultivated massive, loyal fan bases that demand access, and they'll do whatever it takes to stay visible. And the lesson is clear. If the Black community truly recognized and harnessed its own leverage, the potential would be enormous. Our collective financial influence, voting power, and cultural reach could make entire markets, political agendas, and global conversations revolve around us. The truth is, we already move culture. Our music sets the tone for the world. Our style, our slang, our art, they ripple across industries and shape how billions consume media. Yet, too often, we underestimate that influence or fail to organize it in a way that sustains long-term growth. When we look at how digital creators have transformed the media landscape, we see a blueprint for what real leverage looks like. These creators, whether they are on YouTube, Rumble, or X, understand one key thing: consistency creates control. They don't wait for platforms to bless them with opportunities. They build audiences so powerful that platforms have no choice but to accommodate them. When creators like MrBeast or Joe Rogan demand something, corporations listen, not necessarily because they agree with their viewpoints, but because they understand the economics of influence. Spotify didn't pay Rogan $100 million because they liked controversy. They did it because they couldn't afford to lose his audience. That's leverage in its purest form. It's the same kind of leverage the Black community could wield on a much larger scale if we recognize the full extent of our collective power. Consider the numbers. Black consumers in the United States alone represent over $1.7 trillion in annual spending power, a figure that keeps rising. We make trends go viral. We define what's cool before corporations even realize it. Yet, despite this, the ownership, equity, and infrastructure behind those trends often belong to others. We create the culture, but we don't always capture the profits. That's the difference between participating in a system and leveraging it. Leverage is about recognizing what you bring to the table and then negotiating from a position of power. But that requires long-term thinking. It means sticking with initiatives, building institutions, and sustaining pressure instead of abandoning movements once the hashtags fade. Too often, we ignite incredible energy, whether around economic boycotts, cultural movements, or political organizing, only to see that momentum fizzle before structural change takes root. Meanwhile, other groups or industries quietly study our strategies, adopt our creativity, and monetize what we started. Look at hip-hop. Born from struggle, innovation, and self-expression, it became the most dominant music genre on earth. But who owns the labels, the streaming platforms, the catalogs? Too often, the answer isn't us. The same story repeats across industries: fashion, sports, technology, even social media. We're the drivers of the engine, but we rarely own the vehicle. In contrast, look at how some creators, many with far fewer cultural roots than we have, build ecosystems around their influence. They launch merch lines, start tech platforms, negotiate partnerships, and retain ownership of their intellectual property. They build direct pipelines to their audiences, cutting out middlemen who once dictated the terms. That's leverage. And once you have it, your influence becomes unstoppable. Platforms like YouTube, Rumble, and X, formerly Twitter, are in constant competition because these creators understand the power of persistence. They keep showing up. They don't wait for algorithms to favor them. They master the algorithm. They build communities that follow them wherever they go. That kind of loyalty forces corporations to adapt. When YouTube tightens its policies, creators threaten to move to Rumble. When X introduces monetization, creators experiment with new content forms. The platforms listen, not out of generosity, but because competition makes them. That's a key principle we can learn from. Economic pressure creates negotiation power. When a group acts collectively, whether through buying habits, content creation, or political engagement, it can change how entire systems operate. Imagine if even a fraction of the Black community directed its spending toward Black-owned businesses for a sustained period. Imagine if we built our own distribution networks for music, film, and fashion, and committed to them long enough to make them profitable. That's not just a dream, that's strategy. The potential isn't theoretical, it's historical. From the Greenwood district in Tulsa, known as Black Wall Street, to movements like the Harlem Renaissance, we've seen what happens when Black enterprise, creativity, and collaboration come together. The results were wealth, innovation, and self-sufficiency, until those systems were dismantled by external forces. But today, with digital tools, social media, and decentralized markets, the barriers are lower than ever before. What we need now isn't permission, it's persistence. Leverage, persistence, and audience building, not just talent or ideas, are what make influence unstoppable. That's the formula. Talent can get attention, but persistence builds empires. The audience gives leverage, and leverage changes everything. When we understand how to wield it strategically, it becomes transformative, not just for individuals, but for an entire community. YouTube doesn't want to lose ground to Rumble or X. When creators have options, the balance of power shifts. The same logic applies to us. If we build alternatives, our own platforms, our own infrastructures, then corporations, politicians, and institutions will have to adapt to our interests instead of the other way around. That's real freedom. So, the message is simple but powerful. Recognize your leverage, protect your ownership, and play the long game. Because once we stop reacting and start strategizing, once we stop asking for inclusion and start demanding equity, the entire landscape changes. That's the insight I wanted to share. It's your boy Jackson, back again with another episode of Celebrity Junk. I appreciate all the love, all the support, and all the people out there grinding to build something real. Keep your head up, stay focused, and remember, leverage is power, but persistence makes it permanent.